Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Coffee and Open Source. I'm super excited for our guest today. First off, I wanted to thank our sponsor, New Wave Coffee. It's nootropic coffee with theanine and cacao in it. Super exciting. I have it every morning. It makes me feel super great. So shout out to New Wave. I'll post a link to them in the chat. Today, I'm very, very excited for my guest because we just spent like the last 20 minutes before talking about museums and zoos and aquariums, and hopefully we continue that conversation into the tech space because she works in education. So my guest today is Jen Looper. Say hi, Jen. Introduce yourself.
Hi, how's everybody doing? Happy, what day is it? Wednesday.
I hope it's
At
Wednesday.
this point in the pandemic, we have no earthly idea what day or what time it is. I'm calling in from Boston, so it's a beautiful spring day. The flowers are blooming and the sun is shining, so everything's good. And yeah, I'm an education cloud advocate in Microsoft, and we are tasked with doing everything education. So anything having to do with students and teachers and educators. Not so much K-12, mostly higher ed, but we dip our big toe into the K-12 space a little bit. I'm particularly excited that I'm allowed to work with museums and libraries as an educational sector. So that's what we've been geeking out for the last half an hour talking about.
Geeking out is you're being very conservative in that. I think we definitely went way too far, almost to the effect that we almost forgot to start streaming. We were just talking about these sort of things, right? I mean, so I love museums and zoos, and I think you share a very similar feeling there. And I think one of the things that we can do better in tech is, embrace the education possibilities that exist with some of our institutions, whether it be aquariums, zoos, museums, planetariums, right? These are things that could take full advantage of tech. And I want to talk about that in a little bit. One of the things that really excites me when I talk with people is kind of how you got, not to how you got started in tech per se, we can talk about that if you like, but one of the things that I always find interesting is how open source came to a particular person. I think all of us remember certain scenarios where we came across something and then we realized that, this is free and open software and it's for people to not just use, but they can change or contribute in a way that's meaningful. Do you have a moment like that, kind of when you first got started in tech that you remember?
Yeah, I think so because I think you and I have both been around for quite a while. I've been in the industry for over 20 years, and I started out doing Cold Fusion, which is 100% closed source.
Sure,
So
yeah.
it's like the old school Adobe stack, right? Coming on up with that with those CFIF tags, and it wasn't until I became a developer advocate and joined, well, maybe a little bit before that, but really I dove into the open source when I became developer advocate for NativeScript, which was, and it still is, built open source from the ground up. Instead of like flipping to open source, it was like natively open source.
Sure.
And that I found was a fantastic way to connect with people and build community. So I was helping, sort of as this classic DevRel person, building up the community and getting everybody excited about NativeScript and helping engineering make it better for the community. And it was just a really nice synergy between what I was as DevRel and what I was interested in was building mobile apps using free and open source solutions. And that was a really, really great experience.
Yeah, that's super exciting. I think so. As somebody as yourself who's been in developer relations or DevRel for a long time, right? One of the things that I think is very important is you have to kind of pick, and this is, I don't mean this to be offensive, but you have to pick your angle, right? Because developer relations is very, it's a wide net, right? And if you could get stuck in doing things that you have no interest in unless you kind of land a niche of sorts, right? So what would you say would be kind of your niche in developer relations? Is it definitely education, higher learning, that sort of thing? Have you always been kind of focused in that space in developer relations?
Yeah, well, it's changed because I came from the company that did
Yeah.
NativeScript, which is Progress. Well, it was Telerik before. Telerik was acquired by Progress, and and it was really just like I loved building mobile apps, so I jumped into that product foot first and became sort of de facto community manager and speaker on all the stages. So I was like the face of NativeScript for a while. And that's, of course, at Microsoft is a way bigger organization, and there's
Sure.
many more opportunities and many different things to do. And where I've landed, I started at Microsoft as I was leading the Canadian, American, and South American DevRel for regional advocates.
Okay.
And that kind of, yeah, that changed because like I was an American cloud advocate running around doing talks in
Yeah.
Japan. So there was like this
Yeah.
clear mismatch of what expectations and reality. And then I found my way into the academic team, and from there into the education team. We just got reorged into the education team. And my niche right now is curriculum building. So it's
That's
really
awesome.
changed. Yeah, and it's really, we have this viral curriculum that went out. It's free and open source. It's on GitHub. Everybody can jump in. And it's 24 lessons, 12 weeks, standard curriculum, learn web development, HTML, CSS, JavaScript from the ground up, doing projects. So
Hmm.
by the end of the 12 weeks, you'll have built all kinds of really fun and cool projects, a typing game, a space game, a bank, and other fun. They build a terrarium. That's my contribution.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
drag and drop cactus.
And for the
So yeah,
folks who aren't very familiar with some of Jen's work too, like you've done some very cool like interactive pieces too that Microsoft has put together, right? Like, and I love them. Like the like you've had Halloween themed ones and you've had like other sort of fun things, right? And I think one of the things that we miss a lot when we're trying to bring up the next generation of developers is figuring out ways to make technical concepts resonate, right? Because I think one of the things that's very challenging is like, hey, teaching somebody about, whether it be object-oriented architecture or, name your programming concept, or even just how to be a developer with forms over data stuff, like how to make that, like how to land that message, have it make sense with somebody who maybe they're in high school, maybe they're in college, and they're not 100% sure what they do, right? So one of the things that you've seen, because you've done a lot in the education space, like how do you, like one of the things that you see are very impactful and have direct results?
yeah. Well, I had a real moment last build when I was working in the student zone, and I was giving a little interactive talk about how to build that terrarium.
Yeah.
So that's where the terrarium project came from. And I had 700 students with me, and we were all together all over the world building an interactive drag and drop terrarium using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I just realized it has to be fun.
Yeah.
It has to be beautiful. It has to be interactive, and it has to be a quick win
Yeah.
to get that confidence. So this is the way I always teach. By the end of an hour, you will have built an app, and you're going to love every minute of it. So that's
Yeah.
the way
Yeah.
I always approach. By God, you're going to love it.
Yeah.
So it has to, and I think that building something beautiful and fun and cool and sometimes cute, can be a great way to learn base concepts. So
Yeah.
that's kind of my angle. Whether it's building, so we built using static web apps. We built and Azure Maps. We built a Halloween map,
Mm-hmm.
and my whole town got involved. So everyone was signing up into a form saying, put my house on this map, and then all the kids are trick or treating, and going in and collecting candy
Yeah.
at all the places. So but it was a great way to talk about Azure Maps. Sneak in a little
Yeah.
product
Of
pitch
course. Of
there.
course.
They're gonna love every minute.
Yeah. And what you said brings up a very interesting point. So, when I started, like, so you mentioned a lot of things that are foreign to me a little bit, right? Like like things have to be pretty, things have to be. I'm a more of a, I guess you could say, traditional developer because like I don't have a ton of great design skills, right? By nature, like I jokingly say that I have no like right part of my brain, like the creative side doesn't exist. I mean, it's not 100% true, but I think it's hard for me to put together a concept, right? But if somebody gives me a concept, I have the skills to be able to build what they want, right? So, what you mentioned about the fact that things have to be pretty, things have to be designed well, and that's what resonates with younger people. I think that's really, really spot on. When do you think that mindset kind of switched, right? Because there's a long time where, being a software developer, you really didn't have to care unless your app was public facing, which, a lot of developers don't have that luxury. It doesn't really matter what your app looks like because your audience is, whether it's an internal person, it can look whatever it looks. And only if it's a public facing app is where you actually care about the design of it, right? So like, when do you think that started to change? Do you think it was the introduction of JavaScript frameworks? Do you think it was that Web 2.0 that people talk about all the time, like in the, early 2000s? Like, what was the catalyst for like, oh, we actually care about how apps are designed now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I feel like the browser wars had to cool down a little bit. And right at that time, responsive web came around and the mobile apps came out. And I have this theory that maybe mobile apps kind of kick-started this idea that not only things have to work very nicely within this much space, and look nicely and perform well, so that design comes to the forefront because you have such a tiny amount of space to work with. I feel like mobile apps really pushed this. Apple pushed it. Everything in a native app with Apple needs to be beautiful. And then I feel like the user has been empowered recently to face tune things or to make a TikTok video with all the bells and whistles that you can do in TikTok, to make it absolutely your own. So the user now is empowered to create, using low code solutions and mobile apps that really help you do that to make beautiful things. So really, I think there's an expectation that, shoot, I can do this in TikTok. What's the matter with you? That you can,
Yeah.
you're building something hideous.
So what I hear is that you're blaming social media for making this. That's
Probably.
yeah. There's probably some.
Democratization.
I think also when you think about, and this is gonna be me sounding old, even though I'm not old, right? Like all the young people, they love shinier things, right? Which I'm an adult, I'm older too, but I like shiny things. I think one of the things that is very captivating about how some ways folks build things is it's all around what the end goal is. And I think, I have some friends that work in user experience, and I remember when I first started out, user experience wasn't like a career path, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, there's probably something too, like people see trends in the industry of like there's this focus or this need for things to be more aesthetically pleasing or more, not even just aesthetically pleasing, but accessible, right? And worrying about, not just what, who's using the app, but like in what context. Are they using it on a phone? Are they using it on a browser? Do they have a good internet connection? Do they have, different abilities that kind of force how they need to view things? I think that's a very interesting way of thinking. And, in the past, I don't think that was focused about enough. And I think it's great that it is now. But I'm always very curious about like what are the catalysts for movements, right? And like now we're very much into like the Jamstack movement, right?
Yep.
Where it's like, hey, if you can build an app that doesn't involve a server or has a very lightweight server, like that is the way to do it. And it's kind of, some development technologies are more better suited for that than others. And you're seeing a ton of influence being put in by, the creators of some of these different frameworks, right? I know that one of the frameworks that's very close to your heart is Vue, right? I love Vue, and I think, and I
love
like,
you too.
Huh?
I love you too. It's an old joke. It's an old joke.
I love you too. I get it. That's very corny. I'll allow it. But it's funny because I'm just going to use Vue as an example. As when Vue was introduced into the industry or the market or whatever you want to call it, right? There was already existing frameworks that, they'll even admit that the pomp and circumstance of standing up solutions using those frameworks is kind of challenging, right? If you use Angular or React, there's a lot of files that come along for the ride. And Vue introduced this mindset of like, no, you can do everything in one file. Like that's whatever, right? And I think that was pretty brilliant. Well, I think one of the things as well that we see is there's always this shift of complexity to non-complexity. Like we have this concept of like, hey, let's build like the most ridiculous framework possible that has every edge case covered. And then it always swings back to like, but then I have too many files, or it takes me 5 minutes to do an NPM install. And I see, these are things that ebbs and flows of how, different movements make. I wanted to kind of get your thoughts about, we can talk about JavaScript Wars or Vue or whatever, because you're closely tied to those things. But I think, what are your thoughts about these movements of being more focused on, lightweight, fast technologies?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's a great thing. And it all comes back again to empowering the developer and empowering that end user with the great DX, which is developer experience, to be able to bang open the Vue CLI and, create a Vue 3 app or a Vue 2 app in the amount of time that it takes now. It's brilliant. You slap in some Tailwind and you can have a beautiful app in no time. It's been a beautiful experience to watch Vue. Now I'm watching Vue as well as Vue 3 evolves and the composition API, and we'll see where the complexity comes back in.
Yeah.
So we're watching Svelte which has this idea that we're going to compile, I think on the client, I feel. I'm not deep into that ecosystem, but it's like lightweight and fast. But what I really am excited at is Vite. If you've looked at Vite, V-I-T-E.
I've seen stuff. I haven't played around with it. So, if you want to educate me on it, that'd be great.
Play with this thing. It is lightning fast. It's because it doesn't use Webpack. It uses, this different technology behind it. I think it's another one of Evan's amazing brain children. But the nice thing about Vite is it doesn't force you to use Vue. You can use React with it. So it's really just, the underlying compilation and the bundling that's going on behind the scenes. But it's so fast. It's almost like it's so fast that you feel that you made a mistake.
No, that's funny.
So,
it's also
so
very, like you mentioned Webpack, right? Like it's funny because I haven't thought about Webpack in so long, but literally like all of these things have requirements of Webpack. In Webpack, I remember when Angular JS or Angular 1, like the first iteration of Angular, and then they started like introducing like these, build components, whether it be CoffeeScript or Gulp or, and then Webpack, and you just look at it and it's like, this is way too much complexity. Like I just want my files to be minified and small and maybe do some work on it, right? And then you see like CLIs or other things that are basically like obfuscation layers on top of Webpack. And I was always very interested. It's like, is it a good thing that Webpack is hidden? Because Webpack is in my opinion, like it's very, very powerful, but it's also very dangerous. Like you can spend hours trying to figure out why something's not working because of a Webpack configuration, right? And I mean, do you think it's a good thing that some more complex required technologies get hidden by things like CLIs or, wrapper frameworks or things like that? I'd like to know kind of your thoughts because it is a little bit of hiding how the sausage gets made, which can be dangerous, right?
Yeah, it's true. And nope, I don't want to say anything against Webpack because they've been saving our fanny for the last, many, many years. And we should get Sean on here to talk about Webpack because it's an incredible product. Yeah, it's dangerous to have when you don't know what you're eating, when the sausage is being made, but you're just consuming because that's the thing to do. It is nice to know a little bit what's going on behind the scenes. And when we build our curriculum for web dev, we specifically left out any frameworks at all. So it's all just like vanilla JavaScript. And it's very good to build something like that and then realize, oh yeah, that's why we have these frameworks, because like some of this stuff is really hard to do. But yeah, I think it's just a question of education, and I think you need to be a little aware of what's going on. I think Svelte is interesting because there's a lot of discussion about what's going on behind the scenes. Vite is another great project to watch because, again, it's open and you can take a look at what's going on. Yeah, I think it's good to keep an eye on what's going on behind the scenes and educate yourself. And that's why we learn JavaScript first, and then we jump in the frameworks. Yeah,
and as somebody who occasionally will try to do things in, vanilla JavaScript or regular JavaScript, whatever you want to call it, I always equate this to, there has to be an easier way. And then I remember, like, the easier way is, like, literally, smashing it with the biggest hammer you have. And, like, sometimes I wonder, it's like, I don't know like how much experience you have with like things like jQuery and things like that. I imagine you have a ton of experience. But like I remember jQuery as being like this is perfect because it literally just does. It's very simple. It's one file. It does everything you need. And I feel like we moved away from that concept to having more elaborate control of the situation. And I want to know kind of your thoughts as like how do we balance the it's too complicated versus it's vanilla JavaScript, which is terrifying. And then the thing in the middle, which I think a lot of people are trying, that's always the goal. But then it always ends up swaying to the right, where it ends up becoming too complicated.
I think there's always a gap. There's always something missing. I remember in jQuery, everything's brilliant until you start dealing with binding. And data flow back and forth. And I was like, why won't it pick up my changes? And then you start dealing with curly brackets in Vue and you got that binding. And you're like, yes, this is perfect. Props down, events up, everything's perfect. And so I think each framework has its thing that it's trying to fix. I don't think there's any one framework that does all the things perfectly. I think you have to kind of figure out, what am I trying to build? What's the best architecture for this thing? What framework can I use? What is not going to drive my team completely around the bend? So, and maybe TypeScript, adding TypeScript on top of Vue, maybe that's a part of the solution. I'm not sure. I used to use TypeScript a lot with Angular. but I haven't felt the need with Vue. It's just one more
Sure.
complexity.
Sure.
So it's very interesting because it's that balance. What are you trying to build? What can you obfuscate? What can you like let the framework handle
Hmm.
for you? And where are you going to find the gaps, and how are you going to handle that?
Yeah, and that's the challenging thing too, where you end up in this situation where you're very dependent on the internet, right? I mean, especially, you work with folks that are getting started all the time, right? And you try to introduce the current JavaScript ecosystem to them. I imagine they look at you like you're high, right? Like, you mean there's all these different frameworks, there's all these different approaches, like which one? Because when you're getting started, like I think a lot of people, and this is just me being naive, a lot of people, like their goal is to like get a job to make money, right? It's not about passion of technology. I think that comes a bit later. But at the end of the day, like you're in college or you're in high school and you're like, oh man, I need to figure out my career. And when you start looking at being a developer, you have like, I jokingly say, like you have a choice. You can be the back end developer and not care about design, or you can be the front end developer and only care about design and go down the path of using technology that me personally, I feel like the term full stack developer is kind of a non-starter. I always kind of have thought that. I feel like the idea of
Yeah,
full stack developer is somebody that just knows CSS, right, and JavaScript a little bit. But I'm kind of rambling a bit. But I think my question initially is like, how do you talk to people who are getting started and when they're very confused about the plethora of options that exist, not just in the JavaScript ecosystem, but technology in general?
Yeah. So, as you know, we took our curriculum that we built for Microsoft, and we are using it now in a boot camp that I founded. So, working with boot camp students is very interesting
Sure.
because they are those people who are career switchers. Maybe I have dentists from Romania who are learning how
Oh
to be web
wow.
developers. I love them. They're so fabulous because I have a European cohort, African cohort, South American
Hmm.
cohort, and North American cohort. So, watching how they are looking at technology and watching what excites them, it's very interesting, but I really feel like let's talk about basics. Let's talk about methods and functions and the way stuff works on the internet. We lead with accessibility. So to plant that idea well, actually, the first lesson is on GitHub.
Yeah.
So we could talk about, how to get your portfolio up, how to
Sure.
become that open source person. And then one lesson after that, we start talking about accessibility.
Sure.
So it's really about, how to build openly, how to build inclusively, and then we'll start talking about those basics. So, and we don't hit a framework until lesson 22.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
imagine. Yeah, I imagine there's a lot
yeah.
of okay, so now what that goes on during that, right? But I guess I'm a bit biased in the like all the probably steps, 1 through 20 are all like, oh, those are things that I already have. Like I don't care about these things. But I guess setting up a GitHub profile. I mean, or
Yeah.
setting up, just understanding the concept of Markdown or understanding, you know, what open source actually means. It's not just like, oh, here's your stuff and put it here. It's here's your stuff, you put it here. Everybody sees it. Everybody can, everybody can review it, which I think a lot of people are terrified of the fact that other people can see their stuff. That was a big thing for me when I got started with open source. Like, you mean everybody can just review my terrible code? Like, that's not a great idea. I mean, I don't like that at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
I hear you.
but I'm very like, it seems like there's there's a lot of thought put into like just the first 5 steps of being a technologist, right? And I think that's really, really important. And I think one of the things you mentioned is GitHub, right? And GitHub is kind of like the de facto starting point for like all technologists now, which, if you are in certain echo chambers in Twitter, that's either a very good thing or a very bad thing, right? I think, there's this huge conversation going around where it's like treating GitHub as a resume is not a good idea versus it's a good idea. And I kind of want to know what your thoughts are on, like, for you, for instance, like you have a public persona, a social persona, right? You have your Twitter, your GitHub, your everything, right? And
Yeah.
I want to get your thoughts on how can technologists care about, knowing that people probably when they're asking for job opportunities, they're looking at people's GitHub, but at the same time, you can't use GitHub as the de facto source of truth for somebody's ability to be a technologist, right?
Right, right. Well, GitHub will show your skill as a programmer,
Sure.
which is nice. Nice to have a nice portfolio. I do think, I mean, I think I have 120 repos. It's like, it's too
Got
much.
to clean them up.
And
Got to clean them up.
yeah, yeah, too much going on. It's nice now that GitHub has that homepage
Yeah.
that you can create a repo with the same name as your handle, and then it turns into like you can. I mean, mine turned into blingy, so it's
Yeah.
like all sparkly.
Like it's the
It's
old
really weird.
MySpace, right? I told somebody it was like the old MySpace where
Exactly.
it's like, there's sometimes you would go to somebody's MySpace and like you would literally crash your browser because there's so much junk on
Yeah,
it,
yeah, yeah.
right? I'm waiting
I love it.
for
I love it.
I'm waiting for the person that decides like, oh, I'm going to replicate a MySpace page as my GitHub profile, and they'll have 4 million viewers or followers and all this stuff, and it'll be amazing. But people won't be able to
Yeah,
go to it because it'll literally crash browsers, which I can't wait
it'll
for.
crash. I do have a quite impressive fake web page that we created with Fox. Is really something else. But yes, GitHub is great for your portfolio, but it's also, I think, important to have a nice LinkedIn profile because that will show your soft skills and your other kinds of things that you do, and it'll kind of talk a little bit more about your connections because you can get
Sure.
those, people interacting with your profile a little more easily. So those two things together, I think, are quite a nice match. Seems to work for a lot of folks when they're looking for that job.
Yeah, I mean, I have the personal belief that I think LinkedIn is very very important, even though it at times I think it's kind of clicky. Like,
Mm-hmm.
plus it opens you up to just be bombarded by people who don't know what they're talking about. But I think there's a happy medium between whether it's you want to like start out in blogging. I tell people all the time, they're like, if
Yeah.
you're getting started learning anything, like you might as well blog for it. Like
Yeah.
I have a friend who jokingly says like I blog for my future self because the amount of times that I've Googled something looking for the answer and I find a blog post for it 4 years ago, like
Mm-hmm.
it's way too high. I think the blogging is a great example of continuing, self education, after you've gotten to a
Yeah.
point. But even I think it would be interesting to see how many people that are getting started in tech they blog their experience of getting started in tech. I think that'd be something that'd be very interesting to see. And I know the
I
experience is
think
different for everybody, but
Yeah, I think there is a push between blogging, which is standard writing like on Dev 2 or something, or YouTube.
yep,
They're doing a lot of making videos just talking about a day in the life
yeah,
of Gift Eguenu has a really cool YouTube channel where she's just she had like the day in the life of a Nigerian developer. This is
oh,
what
cool,
happens, and she just walked through her day. I thought it was really interesting. I mean, shoot, TikTok is great. There's a whole TikTok meme about or trend about what I eat in a day, stuff
yeah,
like that.
yeah. I see all these platforms, and I think, like, as somebody who, might be a bit egotistical. I think I'm a bit. I care probably a little bit too much about what other people think about me. It's like, okay, so where do I need to put all of my time, right, to get the
Mhm.
most attention? Because unfortunately, that's a personality trait of mine. And I think I see all these things, and I'm thinking like, okay, so where should I plant my flag, so to speak? If I want
Mhm.
to learn the most, if I want to, be a better technologist, I want to interact with the community, like, and there's all these options.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's very challenging to figure out where. And
Yeah.
I've stuck with, like, for instance, I'm on Twitter a lot, and I feel like Twitter
Mhm.
at times you put yourself into these little bubbles of like you only hear good things, and then when you see outside things,
Mhm.
especially when I feel like, and this is me going on a bit of a tangent, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on it when I'm done. When we talk about like the next generation of developers, right, and continuing that education, like I feel there are a lot of technology groups that are like I don't want to say they're against helping out the next generation, but it's not important to them. What's important to them is their issue of the day, whether it be JavaScript wars or whether it be front end versus more traditional like C# or Java based development. And I kind of want to know your thoughts is like how do we do better for educating the next generation by example? I think that's something that my generation is very guilty of it. I think the generations before and after me were guilty of it as well, where we don't focus as much on like how we can enable the next generation to be successful, but we just kind of care about what matters to us right now.
I think that's kind of typical human nature.
Sure.
I think it's something you have to kind of fight against that egotistical trend. Twitter is annoying me more and more because I feel like it's just people flexing all the time.
Yeah.
just constant patting themselves on the back and flexing, and I'm so fabulous. And I'm like, I know you're fabulous. You don't have to
Yeah.
talk about that
I follow
much.
you, right? I follow you, so that means that you're doing something okay. Because if I wasn't following you, I wouldn't know that you're flexing, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think that it is nice if you can also signal boost people who are just coming up.
Hmm.
If you've got a big following, if you can, and my colleague Chloe Condon
Yeah.
does a nice job with this, kind of boosting up people who are coming up. She's very interested in people coming out of boot camps and who are
Yeah.
trying to, enter the industry and, look, this person's looking for a job. Let's try and retweet, just to use these followings and kind of lift other people up.
Yeah.
Another colleague, Brian Clark,
Yeah.
he has a project called Lift Up Devs, I think, and
Okay.
it's all about that. It's
Yeah.
all about lifting people up and helping them build their profiles. So yeah, and I love the groups like Women Who Code, who really paved the way for all of the other stuff that came after. Who are doing exactly that. I mean,
Yeah.
they're putting their money where their mouth is with all the interview prep and getting those kids those opportunities and networking and jobs, and it's really nice to see, honestly. So I just like try to focus on those kind of
Yeah.
programs and projects, not worry too much about the flexing.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've noticed too is that there's an outspoken group, which I love the fact that they're so outspoken, and you mentioned a few of them, Chloe and Brian. I think but it's at a very micro level, right? Like Chloe and Brian and Scott Hanselman and folks like that, like they can only affect a very small amount of people, right? Just because they're one person trying to fight the good fight, as you could say. And I think one of the things that I love to see what else we can do is if we can, and this is a terrible way to phrase it, but if we could reprogram how some of the 5, 10, 15, 20 years of experience developers are, and think about the only way that you're going to be more successful as a human being is if the people next to you or the people after you are more successful, right? Like that old adage of like, you raise your kids better than you were raised or whatever. And I think a lot of that is skipped in tech because there is this focus on, whether you're chasing startup money or you're chasing the hot job at like the top 5 tech companies or whatever, there's this intrinsic focus on upward progression and not as much like, the adage standing on the shoulders of giants. Like it's more like walking on the backs of the people that are underneath you, right? And that's, I mean, that's kind of where I see too. Like I see it not just with individuals, but also companies. And, I'm fortunate enough, I work at a company where I don't feel like that is sometimes. I mean, but you see job descriptions or you see other things where it's like, you need 5 years of experience minimum, right? And it's like, okay, well, where are the jobs for junior developers? And I always, I always think about that a lot where I hardly ever see, looking for associate developers on Twitter. It's always, I'm looking for tech bro who knows, technology X. And it's always, I don't see there's like, because I learned something a long time ago. You can teach literally anybody anything, but you can't teach them one thing, and that's how to solve problems. Like, and one of the things in tech that we're responsible for is solving problems daily. But you can teach somebody Vue or React or Angular or C Sharp. You can teach them that in a matter of time. I think, you have examples of doing that, right? I think what you can teach somebody is a willingness to get dirty and be exhausted because problems aren't easy to solve.
Yeah, and it's the intellectual curiosity and the grit that sometimes it's an acquired skill and it has to be practiced and worked like any muscle. You just have to consistently just bang. I've been banging my head for 20 something years, just trying to fix whatever, try to fix this, solve that, and you always wonder, is this because I'm not like a natural developer? I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably not, but it doesn't really matter because you're going to just stick to it because you would feel bad if you didn't. And that's kind of a muscle that you need to kind of work. And I'm quite interested in, yes, starting in tech and getting all these new people into tech, that's awesome. I want to stop the attrition. I want to make sure that people stay in tech and are happily staying in tech. I'm interested in the long game. So I would like to help create an environment where people find that grit to persevere And I'm not sure how that's going to happen, but I'm really interested in watching people's career progress and seeing how we can help them, feel get that confidence to persevere.
It's kind of a hard sell too, because I jokingly have told people that when I talk to people that are getting started, I'm like, you kind of have to have a slight amount of masochism, right?
Yes.
Right? Like you have to be okay with a little bit of uncomfortableness,
Yeah.
and that's just a part of the job. And I tell people this, like, the only reason why I'm a developer is because it feels good when I solve a problem, right? Otherwise, I would not be in this gig anymore, because there is so much, I don't want to say challenge, but there's a lot of obstacles that are self introduced or introduced by technology or introduced by whatever, and you have to be okay and willing to adjust.
Yeah.
And I do tell people that are getting in tech, I'm like, it's okay if tech isn't your thing, because you don't want to deal with that. But what I don't want you to think of is that you can't do something because it's too hard, right? Because everything's hard. And I think that at the end of the day, it's very, very important to be okay with uncomfortableness, I guess, is my thought.
Well, and I watched my bootcamp girls. I watched them reach out, and they're really freaking out after the first lesson. They're like, because they're coming from they've never touched this stuff before. So some of them, and they're like, I feel like you're speaking a foreign language. What are you talking about? And I'm like, don't quit. I promise you it will get easier. I promise.
Yeah.
Like, if I can do it, you can do it. So it's
Yeah.
like really just helping them feel that confidence. And I am watching them persevere, and I'm watching her level of comfort go up with Visual Studio Code. And she found an extension that I think one of our friends in the Azure group, sorry,
No problem.
I'm flickering in a weird way. Anyway, it was a pet extension in Visual Studio Code.
Oh,
Super
yeah.
cute.
Yeah, there's all sorts of, I mean, I've noticed that people are turning VS Code into this thing, which I love. I mean, like the fact that you can just extend VS Code to your heart's content. I can hear you still. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's better.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's funny because you did not flicker at all, and your audio is great. So whatever I'm doing is good. So, and I think whatever you're doing is good too.
We're good.
So, I mean, yeah, I love the fact that people are personalizing the tech they use, which I think is incredibly impactful, especially in those uncomfortable moments, right? Like, I don't know how stressed you can be if you are having a hard time and then all of a sudden like a sheep walks across like the top of your window, right? It's very, very hard to it's very, very hard to, I guess, continue to be negative or upset when you see something ridiculous happen. I mean, I'm going through like all sorts of ridiculousness at work and in personal life, and it's like occasionally something will cross my mind and I'm just like, oh, that's so ridiculous that I forgot about everything else. And that's what's really, really important. And if tech can distract us in ways, so we can focus on things. Plus, I think you can probably relate to this. We're probably at our best when we're distracted. Like our best thoughts come in, like the amount of times that I've been like half asleep and thought of something, or the thought
in the shower thoughts.
Shower, or like you're focusing on something else, and then you have to like literally put everything down and write on a piece of paper or something. These things are really, really important, and I think I'm interested to know, like, when you, like, do you have these conversations with your getting started developers, right? Like, you're gonna have moments where there's challenges, and stepping away is super important. It's not just a matter of being in the mindset constantly. It's about hopping in and out of different contexts, and context switching is super important. I want, like, how much of the soft skills of being a developer do you focus on when you do these things?
Yeah, for me, it's all about pedagogy. So I'm actually trained up as a French teacher.
Okay.
So I have a PhD in French, and my entire life I was supposed to become a French teacher, which is fabulous because that didn't really work out. Because it's not a growth industry. But when we were taught how to teach French, we were always taught, you have this thing called the affective filter.
Sure.
And it's all about, your resistance to new ideas and your brain saying, I can't, I won't, and it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
You have to lower that down. And usually through some kind of game or distraction. When I used to teach French, I used to have a little toy that I would toss to people. And when they caught it, they had to give me the conjugation of the verb.
Sure.
So it's like, we're going to do être. Okay, here, je suis. So it was really, to just take that affective filter down, have fun, enjoy yourself, and as you do, you'll learn just so much better. So it's really, just and I've written articles about this. I haven't talked to my boot camp about it, but you're giving me the idea that I probably should go in and have a little chat with the cohorts, have a little office hour or something with them and talk about that.
I had a friend who he was older in his life and he decided to pick up French. And he found out like the only way that he was going to do better in learning French was to put himself in situations where he could only speak French. So like him and some other people that were learning French would go to a bar and have a couple of glasses of wine, and they would literally have to buy. And they would also have to pay up with drinks if they started speaking in English, right? And I think that's kind of dangerous because especially with people that are learning. But I think one of those things where it's, the immersion idea of languages is so important, right? I think that's the number one way that you can learn anything is by being not given the option to do other things. But tech doesn't have that luxury, I think.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's very difficult because we're constantly code switching and doing other things and multitasking. So really finding flow, the book Flow, and finding that that immersive moment. You're going to learn best, but boy, is that hard to find in this day and age.
Yeah, and I want to call out like one of our viewers, Infogon. I hope I pronounced your name right. They have a question for you, and I think it's a kind of a tongue-in-cheek question. It's like, how does she have so much energy? And I think, and the follow-up is, she's very active, and it's a good thing for open source to have people like her. So, I mean, I agree with that sentiment. But that's a good question, right? Like, how do you avoid tech burnout?
Yeah, and hi, Infogon, how are you? Infogon's been a supporter of Front-End Foxes for ages and ages, like since day one. So it's so nice to see you listening in. Yeah, I'm 50. So I feel like I don't have the choice to not be energetic or I'm going to die, right? So
Sure.
No, but it's well, I do work out. I had a pretty good workout this morning. So keeping your physical fitness level at a decent level. I'm actually on a little bike right now.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to flex the spot because TikTok made me buy it. So you just keep moving, keep moving, and also figuratively keep moving, keep learning. Microsoft. You don't have the luxury at Microsoft to not be learning. You better keep on your toes, or you're going to get bulldozed. So, And I'm actually pretty excited because in about a month I'm going to start to get a second master's, and Microsoft is awesome because they support our continuing education. But I'm going to get a master's in curriculum design, and so just looking forward to these learning opportunities. That's what kind of keeps me alive.
Yeah, I'm curious because it seems like a lot of your interests do lie in a bit of academia, right? Did you ever have a thought at one point in your career where it's like, well, I mean, you mentioned that you were going to be a French teacher, right? But have you thought of recently as like academia, recently as a profession, or is it one of those things where you can take a lot of your loves and kind of combine them into something that you get fulfilled from?
Yeah, I come from a long line of educators. I think I'm fourth generation. My daughter also is teaching now, so that's lovely to see. But yeah, I think, I was supposed to go into academia. I mean, I got the PhD and everything, and it's just that my PhD isn't very, very specialized. It's in 13th century French literature, so it's extremely special.
Sure.
And there are literally no jobs, like zero jobs. And still, the humanities is a rough place for anyone. I'm really interested in digital humanities, and I just recently jumped back on this bandwagon. Digital humanities started coming up in about 2011, 2012.
Okay.
The big moment was the National Endowment for the Humanities started giving grants in about 2014. I missed this boat completely. So I'm thinking now I have this luxury maybe that I can take my interest in tech and my passion for the humanities, which has never left, and find new ways to merge these two. So I'm actually working on a book, hopefully with Wiley, to talk about, like a toolbox for the digital humanist. And, here are like tons and tons of code samples and ways that you can build things and different ways to just leverage tech for humanistic disciplines. So it's really emerging at this point.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think as somebody who I always have thought about, like, because I love to give the information that I have. I love to share things, but I've always been like, I mean, do people need, I always feel like I lack the patience for teaching, but occasionally I'm like, I mean, I don't have patience for anything. I mean, what's the difference between, being impatient in tech versus impatient with personal things versus impatient with teaching students? And I think I highly recommend to anybody out there that they feel they have something to give. Like, a good way to start is to, be a bit more vocal, build things on GitHub or build things that people can learn from. If you have the ability to speak at meetups and conferences, like, that is a form of educating. It's obviously not as extreme as being a college professor or a high school teacher or what have you, but there's multiple levels of educating, right? And I think, one of the things that you're doing with Front End Foxes is really interesting, right? Where, like, you have this, it's all about that next level, but it's in a way that's more accessible by people, right? Because I think a lot of the big knocks on, information systems curriculums at colleges or computer science curriculums is that they're very gated, right? Like, there's all these requirements that you need. But, for online schools or, online-based curriculums, they're, the only barrier is your willingness to learn, right? Or willingness to want to learn. So I'd like to know a little bit more is how do people come to that program, and how do you get the word out? And what is the initial thought when people are done with the curriculum? Is it an excitement, or is it okay, where's my job? Is it what are the experiences for people coming in and then leaving the curriculum?
For Front End Foxes School?
Yeah, or for any of the things that you've done, right? I like Front End Foxes School as an example, but...
Yeah, I don't have enough data points for you yet because we just got started. Yeah. We're only in our second week, so I'll tell you in 11 weeks,
sure.
in 10 weeks. But and I really think it's kind of where you're coming from. If you're a career changer and you're looking at a boot camp to help you reskill, I think at the end of it, well, what we've promised at the end of this is that they'll at least have a portfolio.
Yeah.
They'll have something they can show. And what I'd love to eventually do is have some coaching on interviews and have some networking moments. I'm looking for sponsors so that we can get those people to talk to, the ladies in the program and give them tips, and maybe look at internships. An internship would be a great thing to jump into after this kind of program.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it really depends on where you're coming from and where you want to go. I know one lady just said that she has already signed up for a second boot camp after ours.
Oh, awesome.
So it's kind of like people just keep going. You know, it kind of depends on what you're looking to do. But just a moment you were talking about the different opportunities we have to teach. I want to plug the TEALS program. Do you know about TEALS?
Yeah, no, I've been a TEALS instructor myself, right? I think
that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, so I mean, to be completely honest, I had a bit of a mixed experience with the TEALS program because I didn't align with what the teacher that I was aligned with, like how to educate. He and I had a bit of a difference of opinion on what was important. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, the concept is great. Like, if you have the ability to align yourself to a community college or a high school, and you can help out in ways I led a how to get started in Python for through the public library in a place I used to live, right? A program like that. And I think these things are great because you get the entire gamut of people coming in. You have people that, they're already in tech, but they want to learn new skills. They're coming into tech, they're younger. Especially in some scenarios, you have the ability, I heard that you can build games. I want to learn game development. I want to build games. Yeah. And I think that's, there's a lot of technologies that are definitely very enticing for young kids because the thought of building video games for a living sounds very exciting until I think you actually start building video games for a living and you find out that it's not exciting or it's kind of terrifying, right?
It's pretty scary. Yeah. Actually, yeah. So we've been working with the National Museum of Computing, so Bletchley
Yeah,
Park, the home of Alan Turing's, genes, and they are very interested in preparing people for to enter the workforce, and very
yeah,
specifically, they're working with autistic students. So we've had the privilege of working with groups of autistic students, and it's been incredibly rewarding. So we're going to do another event with them for a group of women, and so there's lots of organizations out there that are really interested in working with you, even on a small scale, even just a workshop or two.
yeah,
So like look outside the box if you want to teach. You could start with your meetups, but there's all kinds of opportunities out there. It's
yeah.
real interesting.
Yeah, and what you'll find out, I think, is that depending on the medium, you'll find a completely different set of potential. I don't know what the form educationese. I guess that's not a word, obviously, but I think it's you have this opportunity to hit different levels of people that are of people of interest, right? With meetups, I think it's very clear, like the kind of people that come to meetups, right? You know, the
They're hot
self
what pizza.
yeah, well, I mean, yeah. Food? Where's the food? Oh, there's no food. Oh, see you later.
Yep.
I mean, shout out to Jen's from Boston, and I've spoken at a ton of the meetups in Boston. Like, shout out to like North Boston Architects and Boston Developers Group, and like because for one thing, they always have pizza. Like I've never presented at an event in Boston where there wasn't pizza. So shout out to them. Um, I think it's one of the things that, like, also I see a lot as we're trying to educate people is, the willingness to succeed, but a lot of the outcome, like I mentioned a bit earlier about the outcome eventually is to find a job or potentially build a career. But on the flip side of that, you have employers that have interview processes that potentially may not land directly with the curriculums that you're teaching in some of these boot camps, right? So like how do you
Yeah.
prepare for that? Because I imagine that's very disheartening as somebody who they spend 12 weeks in a program, they feel like they know what they're doing, then they go into an interview at a big company that has a horrible interview process and they fail
Yeah.
miserably and they lose all of that, positive momentum. Like how do you work with people when they run into things like that?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it is a real mismatch. And I just had a person asking this exact question because she really dreams of going to a big company
Yeah.
and getting a job. And I'm starting to look at, I found a video on the interview process at Microsoft. My interview process was a little different because I was coming into the people manager, so there
Yep.
wasn't any whiteboarding. It's kind of interesting. Um, I'm lousy at whiteboarding. I've
Uh,
always been lousy at whiteboarding because it's not, I mean, I'm self-trained. I didn't come up through the ranks
yep.
and I'm that way anyway. But we're trying to point people towards the like Interview Cake, Lead Code. Oh, what's the other one? There's another one out there for this kind of prep. But
Code
I'm
Academy is
also
one that
really,
I've used in the past. Yeah.
yeah, those kind of dojo. There's a coder dojo, I think.
Yeah.
But I really want to push people towards women who code in
Yeah.
my community because they do that interview prep in person.
Yeah.
I would love to be able to offer it myself, but I really think the people who do it best are WWC
Yeah.
because at least in Boston, and I'm sure that they do this elsewhere, they have like formal training.
Yeah.
And if I was gonna go up against one of those Google interviews, I can tell you right now, I would go right to a
Yeah,
WWC.
exactly right. And I think, and I've had this conversation probably a million times in my life. That's probably not accurate, but I think it's one of those things where does the interviews does it specifically like does it filter out people that are capable of doing the job or not? Because I remember I jokingly I had an interview at a company and they had me whiteboard and I was like, well, why are you asking me to do this when I could easily look this up online? And
Yeah.
the interviewer was like he was very open. He's like, I mean, I agree, but this is the process. And it's like, okay, well, can I look at my phone right now? And the answer is obviously no. But I'm like, well, you're talking about giving people problems to solve without access to anything to help them. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
and I think one of the issues that I have with a lot of these like prep things, like leak code and things like that, is it's honestly only teaching you how to pass the interview. So you're not learning anything from it. Like
No,
you're
no,
just
no, no,
learning
no.
how to
That's
pass
not the
the
point.
interview.
Yeah,
And
that's the only thing.
yeah, and
Cracking, cracking the coding interview, that giant book, Cracking the Coding Interview, just memorize that and you're in Google. I'm
yeah,
like, wow, guy.
it's one of those things where is that really inclusive to people that are joining tech, right? Where it's okay, well, in order for you to work at a company that you want to work at, you need to have everything in your head that you'll probably never ever use as a part of the job. And
Absolutely.
I mean, this is something that I feel like we've talked a while about, what we can do to fix tech and what we can do to fix education in tech. But I think there needs to be a responsibility for the hiring entities that are out there. It's like you see that you have career changers. You see that you have people that are coming out. You see that people that don't do well in situations where it's like, hey, here's a marker, right? And are you filtering out great talent because of some archaic process that was reliable probably 20 years ago, but it's no longer reliable? Like that's something that I think it's very interesting, and I personally, and this is not me trying to talk about how great Microsoft is, even though I think that is, but Microsoft has moved away from that completely. In engineering roles, for instance, like there was an article that was published by somebody in DevDiv, which the team that does Visual Studio and .NET, like they talked about how they moved away from the more traditional interview approach, and now it's just about people's willingness to learn and succeed and problem solve in their own ways. So it's far more conversational as it pertains to interview, other than just a list of whiteboard questions, which Microsoft was guilty of for a long time.
Yeah, that's great to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, my best interview was at Telerik actually, because they said, look, I want you to build me a mobile app, launch it on Telerik platform, which was the product that they were working on at the time, and just take your resume and flip it to become a mobile app, and I would do that really, really fast.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and if you tie it to something that also has like an intrinsic value at the end, like, reversing a string is not a valuable skill. Like taking your resume and making it an online thing, like that's substantially more interesting, and I would be okay, I can definitely do that. Like that sounds like fun.
Yeah. And for front-end developers as well, I think the interview process is particularly broken.
Yeah, I think we can talk about that for a while, but we are running out of time. And one of the things that I told you, it goes really quick every single time. And so as we close, first off, I want to thank you so much, Jen, for taking the time and chatting with me and chatting with our viewers and just talking about how we can do better as educators and technologists to that, enabling that next generation to do things that are be successful. Because in 5-10 years we're going to be very dependent on that next generation to help us move in our own lives. So thank you for being a part of that. When I like to close the interview, one of the things that I love to ask my guests is if they can think about open source or technology and they only had one word to do it, what would that word be to you?
I think inclusive. I think because that's a word that, and you've probably heard this from a lot of folks, because I really think it's a critically important word right now, and it's something that that really covers all of open source, because it's all about bringing new people to the table and widening the table as well.
Yeah.
So
that's great.
Yeah.
I'm totally on board with that, and I love it. I think people have had some very crazy answers, but I think one of the things that it always comes back to is that idea of inclusivity and community, which I think is what open source is really important for. So as we close, Jen, I want to thank you again so much for being on the show. Everybody tuning in, thank you so much. This will be available on YouTube to download later today or view later today. Enjoy the rest of your day and maybe have another cup of coffee, and take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Appreciate it.